What's up, y'all? Welcome to the Sam the Beard Guy channel. Today we are checking out how I build my piano plug-in chain from top to bottom, compressors, EQs, reverbs, kind of mastering, stereo effects and all that stuff. We're basically taking our sound from this to this. So these are plugins that I have been going to and going back to and just using as a part of my natural workflow forever. I have a ton of plugins, but these plugins are just the bread and butter. They always work. I'm always going to them, and I love them. So as always, like, share, comment, subscribe. Go follow me on Instagram, TikTok, whatever. I have a few master classes on my website if you want to check those out. Today's New Year's Eve. I'm recording this at 5:30 in the morning on New Year's Eve. It's been an awesome year, so thank y'all for following me. It's been awesome. Looking forward to 2025 and doing more fun things, trying to post to YouTube even more. I kind of got away from posting YouTube a little bit in 2024 because my Instagram blew up and it kind of distracted me, but I'm coming back at YouTube next year or in 2025, so y'all stay around because we're going to got some fun things planned, I think. I always think they're fun, and then maybe they're not. So we're going to be we're going to be using the Noire Pure. This, I think, is a great kind of out-of-the-box plugin that doesn't have really any processing going on that I can tell, or at least not a lot of processing going on in the box. I wouldn't want to use something like Keyscape because Keyscape comes super produced already. There's compression happening, EQ, all that stuff. So I want to use a piano that is kind of bare bones and basic. So we're going to start with a Noire Pure. So the first thing we're going to want to do, that I always do, is make sure that this volume has come in at 0 dB. It can come in at -6, which, depending on your setup, you can set it to either -6 or 0. You can change that in the settings. I don't know that it really matters. Just be aware of what volume this plugin is coming at. I usually change it to 0 if it comes in at -6 for whatever reason. And so the first plugin we're going to use, the old faithful Virtual Mix Rack by Slate Digital. This is I think it's $15 a month. They're one of the leading kind of plugin companies. There's Plugin Alliance, there's UA, there's Slate Digital. There's a handful. I've always loved Slate. I have a lot of Plugin Alliance too. Plugin Alliance is great. We're going to use some Plugin Alliance plugins in this chain. But I love the distressor. So distressor is usually going to be what's at the top of my chain. Sometimes I'll add another compressor before. Maybe I'll add a compressor after. But I'm usually starting with the distressor to at least start the whole thing off. And so there's multiple ways you can go about setting up this compressor. I will use probably half the time I'm using a 3-to-1, about half the time I'm using a 10-to-1, which is the opto setting. And so the first thing I'm going to kind of do, I want the gain reduction. I want to start off with very little gain reduction. I just want to see it kind of hitting. And the thing with setting up compressors and really effects or plugins in general, you don't want to just be using your eyes. You want to be hearing or using your ears too. Okay. And then I want to kind of boost the output a little bit. A little loud. Maybe a little more input. Probably want to bring the attack up a little bit. A little more input. Let's bypass. So you can see even with that, like it's just... So sometimes I'll play around with this mix knob too. I like playing around with the mix knob because it blends a little bit of the unprocessed signal in with the processed signal. Compressors on pianos are uniquely and frustratingly challenging for me sometimes when I'm setting up a compressor to play live with. And so I'm a super dynamic player. It's very easy to set up a compressor when you live in one dynamic range. I know a guy who played one dynamic range the whole time, and he had the fullest piano sound I've ever heard. And that's because he was able to squeeze his piano. He was suffocating the piano. And that's because he only played one dynamic range, no matter what. I mean, I would watch him just play these. We'd be in this like mega section. He's just gently touching the piano, but it's just mega. I can't do that because I have a grand piano background. I have a jazz. My whole thing is just dynamic playing. And so it can be challenging to set this up when you're playing live and kind of setting it up before. It's a little bit easier on the back end if you're just, putting plugins on a piano that's already recorded. So I feel good about that. Let's bring in another one and kind of A/B the difference between a 3-and-a-1 and a 10-to-1. So 10-to-1 on this distressor, you want to do opto attack to 10, release to 0. Add that in. really liking this setting a little bit more, so I want to stick with this. Maybe we can blend it just a little bit. So I'm really looking to see what the gain reduction is, but I'm really listening to see how much the signal is like gating or pulling back. And it's okay if you hear a little bit, because especially in the CCM genre, your piano's just in this big wall of sound. If you were to solo a lot of stems for these really popular songs, you're going to hear super compressed pianos that you would never play solo that way. So let's stick with this opto setting for a while. I want to add one more plugin. I'll usually add this little guy right after. And I barely want to just touch this signal. That's fast. I want to do slow attack. And it's helpful sometimes to like kind of really dig in and see what's happening. So I feel good about that. It's clamping a little bit hard if I do that, but I'm not usually slamming the keyboard like that. So it's A, B. Back on. So it's different. It's a little bit fuller. You know, when you're compressing stuff, you're really kind of squeezing in the dynamic range a little bit. So I'm not a big fan of over compressing. Some people like it. Compression's very subjective. There is kind of a wrong way to do it, but you know, a lot of it is just kind of subjective taste. And so another plugin that I kind of add in this Slate chain, I love to add in. I kind of have this unhealthy obsession with high end, and so I will bring in this Revival kind of plugin and add just a little bit of shimmer. It's subtle, but it's in there. I maybe will add a little thickness too. Like, you can kind of hear it. Just a little bit. And then I will add, this is where I can get very carried away. and it's a problem, but I love this air plugin. This is extreme, but just a little bit of air. So let's bypass all this stuff. Back on. All right, so that's Slate. I feel pretty good about where this is at right now. As you add in more plugins, you might, come back and kind of tweak the foundation. But this to me is kind of the foundation of everything. You're starting with the compressor. The signal that's coming out of this plugin chain is a little bit more just squeezed a little bit. The dynamic range is decreased. You got a little bit of air on it when it's coming out. But yeah, I feel good about this foundation. The next plugin I will typically add after that is the Waves F6. So the Waves F6 is a dynamic EQ. And so what a dynamic EQ is, if you don't know, is it is a plugin that on each one of these nodes, you can set a compressor for that EQ range. And so a typical EQ, you would just do this, and that signal is ducked no matter what. With a dynamic EQ, you can set it up kind of like a compressor, but instead of doing the overall volume, it does certain frequencies. So with this range right here, which is at 350, I could set the threshold to a certain volume, tell it how much to dip when it passes that threshold. So the benefit of that is if I'm playing like, this is a little dramatic, but if I'm playing up here, I'm playing really softly, I don't want this ducked unnecessarily. Feels a little more hollow. So I want the flexibility to be able to duck out frequencies depending on the intensity in which I'm playing. And so typically what I'll do, especially with a full band, kind of mix, I'm going to dip out a little bit of 500. I'm going to kind of hunt. This one always kind of drives me crazy. This is also vocal range, so, I kind of want to stay out of that too. I might do a little bit of... I might add a little bit of high end, stretch the Q out so it's, wider versus this. Just give it a little bit more air. Depending on the genre, I might boost a little lows. You got to be careful down here because, you're not a bass player. When I do like the felt stuff, I'm actually dipping a decent amount of low end out because as you play like really dense voicings here, the low end just gets super carried away. So I might add a little bit, you know, here. The cool thing about this is you can actually set it kind of like an expander instead of a compressor, and say, hey, when it passes, you know, X, Y, and Z threshold, it actually boosts the volume. So if I'm digging in, it's going to bump the volume, but if I'm up here just kind of floating around. I don't do that a ton, but it's an option if you want to do that. You know, I typically leave the attack and release kind of just neutral right in the middle. You can fine-tune this more, and I do occasionally, but the dynamic EQ side right out of the box, I feel good about it just kind of being in the middle. Another cool thing you can do with these EQ bands is you can, you know, flip or change how they're hitting the stereo field. And so if I were to solo this chain, makes it mono, sides. So where this could be helpful, and occasionally, you know, you might want to do something like this. Typically in a mix, you want the low end to be a little bit more centered. And so sometimes I'll come in here and kind of take this and throw it mid. Versus it being super wide, I might kind of narrow it up in the middle. It's really subtle. A sound guy is going to, you know, potentially love you for that. So here's A bead. Back on. It's subtle. You know, I don't do a ton of EQ. No, I do some, but, you know, not a ton. So this feels like a good starting place EQ-wise. Again, depending on the genre, depending on what instruments are playing, I might, you know, who's singing or whatever, I might come in and do more with this. But this is a good starting place for me. Waves F6, it's awesome. Another thing you can do with the Waves F6, which if you've watched any of my main stage videos, you've seen me do this. You can do what's called side chaining. And so side chaining, how I use this in main stage for like worship stuff a lot is, you know, we run a ton of pads. We do the whole pad gambit thing. And so I will side chain my pad to the piano. And so when I dig into the piano, certain EQs of the pad duck out of the way for a brief moment. There's nothing worse than a piano kind of being muddied up when you have a ton of synths and pads going. You still want that definition and attack of a piano. And so having the pad kind of duck out certain frequencies, especially in the low mids, is super helpful to just get punchy piano. A lot of people ask me, you know, I'm running all these pads and I can't get punchy piano out of it. It's probably because there's so much muddy stuff happening at the same time. You want to dip some of those pad frequencies out. Go watch my main stage videos. I talk about it in that. But yeah, that is the F6. Let's leave that up. All right, so the next thing that I want to do is add reverb. Reverb makes everything better. Too much reverb makes everything worse. But just the right amount of reverb is awesome. So I love Valhalla. This is a staple. Tons of people use Valhalla. This is kind of like, this is the worship reverb, but it works for every genre. This is just, it's one of the best reverbs. Everyone that ever touches it loves it. I've never met someone that's kind of like, not a big reverb guy, or not a big Valhalla guy. I love it. It's so good. So this is obviously 100% wet. A lot of times I'll run reverb on a bus. I'm going to leave it on this actual piano strip for this one, so we'll actually be playing with the mix knob a little bit. But kind of some go-to moves that I'll do right off the bat. I'll go to Bright Hall. I'll go to 1980s. And so you'll see kind of the difference. Slow attack, low initial echo density, lush chorus modulation, bright tone. 1970s is downsampled 10 kilohertz bandwidth, dark, noisier modulation, where this, no downsampling, full bandwidth. If you go to now, it's bright, clean modulation. So So 1980s is just kind of a go-to for me. I like this one. Bright Hall, I like pre-delay at 20. Honestly, the default way it comes in is, in a lot of ways, fine. I'll typically take this high cut and just move it all the way up, and then I'll probably take the low cut. I don't like a ton of low end. Hitting the reverb, that's a personal preference. Some people don't care. Some people will leave it full. I kind of like getting rid of a little bit of the lows because after feedback from enough front of house guys. So then I'm going to change this back to stereo because So sometimes I will, depending on the song and the feel, or whatever we're going for, I will add, make sure I got these in the right order. This should be this. Okay, so sometimes I'll add a little plate. Let's bypass this. Just a little baby plate. Because that's, a sound that people use, and it's, cool. Yeah, bump that up a little bit and bring the mix down. Plates are kind of weird because it feels... The plate feels way more of a response reverb, like the actual attack of the piano is closer. Tell it's 6 a.m. Playing is a little hard. So I might do the plate, or I might kind of layer them in together. So here's kind of both reverbs happening. Plates first, Bright Hall second. So that feels good to me. We're going to add one more little guy here. It's another Valhalla product, and it is going to be Valhalla Shimmer. Shimmer is awesome. So it's kind of that tail kind of sound. Important things, reverb mix, big stereo. You got to have big stereo. Pitch mode, I want to do dual reverse. Another thing I want to do, I want to bring this low cut up. I really don't want a lot of low end in this. And then I'll try it. Let's try this. So this mod rate, you know, you kind of hear how much kind of, you know, wobbly on there is. That's kind of smoother. This is pretty wild. You wouldn't want that, so let's bring these both back down. But if you really want something funky, you can kind of start, you know, tweaking these guys up a little bit. So I feel good with the high cut, low cut, size is fine. You know, diffusion. Very niche, but so I like that. I like feedback a little bit. Feedback, the signal gets fed back into the reverb or the shimmer for a little loop. Okay, so that feels good, and then I want mix at like, I mean, very little. Maybe high cut a little bit down. Another thing you can try doing, put in the shimmer first. The shimmer kind of now is going through the reverb, so the shimmer-ness is getting verbed. So it's kind of tucked in a little bit more. It's just a sound that you got to figure out which one you want. I'm going to bring it back down. A little bit too much still. I want to bring it maybe to 10. Maybe even lower. So let's mute these reverbs. Right, add them back in. All right, so that's reverb and shimmer. There's a few more dudes we want to add. The next one, I know it seems like a lot, but, you know, it's the way it is. So I want to use an MV2. So an MV2, one of the things that can be frustrating with the piano is you have a really great attack, and then it decays pretty quickly. And so you get that nice punch, then it kind of fades off. And so what you can do is you can kind of set where that low kind of volume stops, and so it's really bringing up the low volumes. That gives me way more sustain versus this. So I'm just getting a little bit more sustain. You can really get dramatic with this. I don't like to do a ton with it, but I just add a little bit, just a little bit, just to help with that low level. The other plugin that I'll typically add, I'm going to say this seems like a lot. It's really not in the big picture. You know, you're always going to have reverb. Typically, you're going to see these reverbs off on their own send. I'm just keeping it all here just for ease. But typically, on this channel, you'd only see compression, EQ, and then the MV2 at this point, because these reverbs and shimmers would be on their own chain, and you'd be sending signal to it. I'm just keeping it all here for ease. The last thing that I want to add on this, I want to use this SPL Iron. SPL Iron is, I just discovered it in like the past year, and it's awesome. There's really 3 things in here that I tweak for piano. I'm going to set the threshold just a little bit. So it's giving a little more volume and a little more compression, so you'll see it kind of hitting, but it's not really going over, over 1 or 2. The other thing I'm going to do now, listen to this. Now listen. Giving a little bit of width. It's just a mid-side button, and then I'm gonna take the stereo width. I might just do 105. Bypassed. Back on. You can play around with this mono maker. This mono maker is basically kind of doing what we did on this Waves F6 thing, where we were monoing or midding or whatever this certain frequency. You're kind of setting where the mono signal gets forced. So you hear all the way up at 2. So here the high end is still like kind of spread out, but everything in that 2K range is mono. So this kind of helps tighten up the low end a little bit if you're concerned about that. So you can play around with that. I'm going to turn this back down because I don't do that a ton, but a little bit of stereo width, mid-side, just a slight amount of compression. And then there's what's called the air bass. So air bass, it's just turning up your bass a little bit. I'm 50-50 on this. Sometimes I'll use it, sometimes I won't. So I want to make sure I'm not clipping. I'll every now and then just really slam the piano, make sure nothing's getting out. I'm right there at the ceiling, which is surprising because I started at 0. And so yeah, let's bypass all these. Here's compression. EQ. Verbs. MV2. SPL. One thing I might, after kind of playing this, I might boost this here, but I might add a little bit of this. Maybe a little bit of dip here. I feel like, this can get a little... So that's the chain. This is a go-to for me. There's a few plugins like the Soothe plugin in the black box that I'm tempted to showcase, but black box is very niche. I'll use that occasionally. Soothe you can't really use live, and so it's kind of a post type of plugin. Soothe is like an F6, but it's just way more scrupulous, and it's got more of a scalpel type of approach. So I won't even get into those, but these kind of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 plugins are like my go-to piano just plug-in chain. If I'm using, like when I use a felt piano, I'm doing a lot different settings, but I'm still sticking to these. I probably don't use an MV2 on a felt, but I'm using this chain on probably 90% of what I do, and then I'm tweaking those settings depending on the genre or whatever, because I'm really checking off all the boxes. checking off compression, I'm checking off EQ, I'm checking off reverb, I'm checking off, some kind of stereo width / mastering compression thing. The MV2 is kind of my own unique thing. I don't think a lot of people do that, but so yeah, that's my plugin chain. As always, thanks for an awesome 2024. If you're still watching, that's amazing. Thanks for hanging around. 2025 is going to be fun. Hopefully all this stuff was helpful. Plugin Alliance, Valhalla, Slate Digital. That's kind of where you, Waves. Those are the companies you want to go check out if you're looking for some of these plugins. So as always, thanks for watching, and I'll see y'all later.